Okay, so before we hear from our next panel, we are going to hear from our session sponsor, Rangefindr.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Matthew Oleynik. I'm the founder of Rangefindr, one of the sponsors of your plenary. If you haven't heard of it by now, Rangefindr is a tool for researching Canadian criminal sentencing ranges. I'm going to share my screen with you briefly here. As you can see in this image, lawyers across most of Canada now have free and remote access to Rangefindr, either via their provincial law society or their umbrella organization of their law library network. And in Ontario, many lawyers already have access through the county and district associations, as a lot of you know. One thing that we hear a lot from our organizational clients is that a significant portion of their membership are criminal lawyers. Criminal lawyers are heavy users of law libraries and library resources, at least when the courthouses are actually open. And it can be difficult to find value-added services for that specific group of members. So Rangefindr is targeted right at that group of members. It's a criminal law tool. It makes their lives a lot easier. And where we have these kinds of group subscriptions, we tend to see high usage and positive feedback from the defense bar. We also publish a number of free resources that you have access to whether or not you subscribe to our site, available at rangefindr.ca. They're listed in our materials here, which you can download from the conference website. All right, thank you for listening. I give you your next panel, which is diversity in the legal profession. Please enjoy the rest of the plenary.
Thank you, Matthew. So again, it gives me great pleasure to introduce briefly our next panel that's going to speak to us about sustainable approaches to EDI strategies. And I want to thank everyone for attending. We have Moheda Cox, Dr. Mohammed Baobad, Mr. Leroy Hibbert, and Devin Persaud. So I will leave it to you.
I think you skipped one, Bill. I think you're on one panel too far.
I jumped ahead. Oh my goodness. I was so anxious to get to the end of the day. Sorry.
You're stealing my list. That's okay.
My apologies. So on this panel, diversity in legal profession, we have Jennifer Gold, president of the Women's Lawyers Association, Raphael Tachie, the president of the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers, Peter Choe, president of the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers, and Devin Persaud, president of the South Asian Bar Association of Toronto, and our moderator, Virginia Lomax from the CCLA Diversity Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your introduction. So my name is Virginia Lomax. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Diversity Committee at the County Carleton Law Association. We've had some really great experiences in the last little while, putting on different events for our members, as well as some educational opportunities. And so I've been really grateful for the wonderful leadership at CCLA and for the support for our committee. And I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you to FOLA for the invitation. And I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. And so I'd love for our panelists in this panel to introduce themselves. And so if we could start with Jennifer Gold.
Thank you, Virginia. I'm, as mentioned, current president of the Women's Law Association of Ontario. The Women's Law Association of Ontario was started in 1919 by some of the first women lawyers in Ontario. And they formed this association to support each other in a profession that was largely male. And we've continued to that day in supporting women in the profession and in many different ways, whether it's through advocacy or mentorship or networking opportunities. I'd like to thank the Law Society of Ontario, particularly because the Women's Law Association of Ontario recently received a Ontario Heritage plaque, which we were able to obtain with partnership through the Law Society, and that plaque now sits on the grounds at Osgoode Hall. So if any of you are in the area, please take a look at it. And I look forward to being part of this panel today. I've been participating in and out of this conference. I'm sure many of you are very tired, but hopefully we can make this interesting and engaging for you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so if Raphael, you'd like to introduce yourself and your organization as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Raphael Tachie. I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary last week. It's funny how small the world is. My great mother-in-law had a birthday, and I was sitting with, we went to go see her. I was talking about a cable conference, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you know cable started in my living room?" Her daughter had been one of the first members to start cable. Now, cable is an association of Black lawyers. And initially our mandate was just to give a place for Black lawyers to come and commiserate with each other and learn from each other. Our mandate has expanded over the 25 years that we've been in existence. And currently our work really is under 5 pillars. The first pillar is really looking at identifying and intervening in public interest cases that impact not only Black lawyers, but the Black community at large. Our second pillar is focused on working with like-minded organizations and individuals to put out public interest research that focus on the impact of law, and again, on either the Black lawyers or the Black community at large in Canada. The third pillar that we work under is professional development for not only Black law students, but Black lawyers, and making sure that our members get the training and the skills they need, especially when we know majority of our members don't end up at the big firms or at large government institutions where you can get the training. The fourth pillar that we work under is looking to create a community of support, not only for lawyers, but also for our community. As lawyers, we tend to be seen as leaders in our community, and we get questions all around, not only legal issues, but what other services are out there to support our community. And so really working on identifying and collaborating with organizations such as the Black Legal Action Center, the OBA's Black Business Law Clinic, to identify resources that can help move our community forward. And then finally, the last piece of the work that we do is looking to publicize and highlight the work that Black lawyers are doing in the community and in the profession. So that's just a little bit about cable and what we do.
Thank you. And so next, if we could have Devin introduce himself and his organization.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you, and thanks for being part of this plenary. It's been an awesome day so far. I am Devin Persaud. I am an associate who works in competition and antitrust law at Goodman's. I was previously at BLG for 6 or 7 years, and I am the current president of SABA Toronto. SABA obviously stands for the South Asian Bar Association. It is one of the 29 chapters that SABA has across North America, and we are lucky to count within our membership, people with likes of Kamala Harris, right down to recent Supreme Court appointee Justice Jamal. So we've had a very lucky run of really high-profile individuals who were once part of our membership or continue to be part of our membership. Within the Toronto area, there's 5 SABA chapters in Canada. Toronto is obviously the largest in North America. We have around 800 members. And we try to also, like Raphael mentioned, put forth a platform of various pillars that delve into advocacy, mentorship, social events. And importantly, what we've been focusing on this year has been pandemic recovery, focusing on mental health in South Asian communities, and also domestic violence in South Asian communities, which has been unfortunately on the rise due to the pandemic, and something we're working closely with our community partners and the South Asian Legal Clinic to figure out ways that we can best support our members and our communities. I first got involved in SABA when I was in law school. We used to have, the student groups for SABA are called Salsa. So I joined thinking it would be about dancing. I actually didn't. It's just stands for the South Asian Law Students Association. And I was able to meet a lot of really cool people and connect with practitioners across the country that way. And I think it's been, a boon to our community, and also to really happy to make connections with the other diversity bar groups within Ontario.
Thanks so much, Devin. And last but certainly not least, Peter Choe from FACL.
Hi, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. So my name is Peter Choe. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG, where I practice intellectual property litigation. I've been at the firm since I articled, so since 1995. It's been quite a while. Thanks to the other speakers as well. A little bit about FACL. It didn't exist when I went to law school. It started in 2007 and was formed by a group of Asian Canadian female professionals, including Abby Go, who's now Justice Go of the Federal Court of Canada. She was then a legal clinic lawyer. Julia Shindoy, who's now the GC at Ryerson University, and Justice Marika Omatsu of the Ontario Court of Justice. She's now retired. FACL was created as a Pan-Asian law association in an effort to build a coalition between distinct Asian communities and to address systemic barriers that Asian Canadians experience as a collective. Currently, FACL has hundreds of members in Ontario, as well as hundreds of additional members in its various affiliated chapters across Canada, including FACL BC, FACL Western, and FACL Atlantic. FACL's mandate as an organization is to promote equity, justice, and opportunities for Asian Canadians in both the legal profession and the wider community. Much of FACL's work is similar to what you've heard from the other organizations, including mentoring. We had, for example, a mentoring session last night where we had about 45 people attend by Zoom, and we had a number of mentors and mentees just being able to ask questions and share experiences with. And that's something that I didn't have when I started my practice. And I think it's particularly for those folks who don't have lawyers in the family, it can be quite invaluable to have that kind of network and resource. Advocacy and policy are also a core of what FACL does. FACL has been involved in a number of interventions at the Supreme Court of Canada, and sometimes in collaboration with other diversity organizations. And I'm quite pleased to announce that recently we had one of our members become appointed to the bench. Justice Leonard Kim got appointed to the bench in Sudbury to the Ontario Court of Justice. So, that's the update from me. Thanks.
That's excellent. Thank you. And so I would like to direct our first question today to Jennifer. I was hoping you could comment on barriers that women face in the law profession, especially when we know that representation in law schools of women, it's quite high, but then representation in leadership roles is not comparable. And so could you please comment, share your thoughts with us on that?
Sure, Virginia, you're right. About 52% of young lawyers and those practicing 5 years and less are women, yet we don't see the same number at leadership levels, whether it's partnership at law firms, boards of organizations, county law associations perhaps as well. And I think I'll identify 3 barriers. I'm sure there are more, but I think the 3 main ones are discrimination and harassment that women face. Number 2 would be the fact that a lot of women still carry the heavier load of childcare and domestic duties, more so than perhaps their partners. And also how power is transferred. And so speaking to discrimination and harassment, the Me Too movement raised a great deal of awareness about the prevalence of discrimination and harassment. I think some of us grew up with a myth that equality had been achieved for women. But I think that the stories we're hearing and the fact that there are not equal numbers of women in leadership positions tells a different story. For instance, some of the data we have in our own profession are reports from the Discrimination and Harassment Council. They're an agency of the Law Society that provides a valuable service to support people who have experienced discrimination, harassment, whether they are members of the public or other licensees. And so this agency provides reports and also reports on the types of discrimination experienced by lawyers, paralegals, and members of the public. Also, based on anecdotal information I receive in my role, many women also don't report instances of sexism that they experience. So the information you may be getting from the DHC may just be the tip of the iceberg. And, one of the factors that may inhibit reporting is that, becoming a lawyer is a long, expensive journey, and many do not want to jeopardize their career, particularly in its early stages. Regarding, the heavier load of childcare responsibility or responsibilities towards family, this is work that's often undervalued in our society. And I think we need to change our perspective on that and perhaps value the leadership skills that women lawyers develop when they are juggling multiple demands and caring for others. And we need workplaces that honor those needs, the needs for flexibility. And I heard the presentation from Cleo, and it seems like we may be moving in the right direction. I wanted to share with you, I recently hired an associate who, in her work experience, put in maternity leave and all of the responsibilities she juggled. And I thought that was wonderful because that is an experience that certainly builds resilience. The third barrier is how power is transferred. So there's been studies, and some of these studies show that people tend to be more comfortable with people who have a similar identity or are part of their in-group. Those with power, namely leaders of organizations, whether you're a board member, a partner, senior management of a corporation, need to check in with unconscious bias. And we need to consider who we are promoting, spotlighting, or giving space to, and why. And I would challenge all of us to think about succession planning and how that can be inclusive, where we not only value different identities, but different voices as well. And I just want to end with a quote from Linda Robertson, who wrote an article for the Canadian Bar Association, which really, hit the nail on the head. She says, law remains a profession modeled on male culture. The networking, client development, style of practice, hierarchical structure of firms, and competitiveness require that anyone joining the profession must practice law as it has always been practiced. So for those women who do move into leadership roles, I challenge you to change the culture and create space for diversity and inclusion in your organization. And I challenge all leaders to actively invite and sponsor people who are different from themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sorry, just about forgot to unmute myself there. So thank you so much for that. And I'd love to move now to Raphael. If you could discuss for us some paths to law schools for racialized students and how the social determinants of justice come into play during applications and admissions.
Thanks, Virginia. So it's a privilege to get into law school, and the ability and access to law school is a function of privilege in a lot of ways. If you look at research, there's a research out of the Peel School District that highlights that for Black boys, they're streamed for disciplinary reasons as early as age 4. That tells you that those students that at that age are being identified as problematic, and that label follows them through their high school and elementary education, chances of them making it to law school becomes really obscure and minimal. If you look at studies out here that shows that for Black kids, they are streamed to things like applied instead of the active academic courses that allow you to get into university and then to law school, that the impact of that practice, whether unconscious or otherwise, limit the ability of those students to have access to law school. But let's put that aside and talk. Law is a family business, whether we like it or not. The professional school is a family business. The chance of being a lawyer is highly indicative by the fact that your parent or a family member is already a lawyer. I joke, I tell this story often. My best friend in law school changed the course of my legal career, because I went to law school with one understanding of what the law was and the career in law looked like. I had no concept of Bay Street. I have no concept of corporate law. Sitting beside somebody whose parents were lawyers, who knew that the profession was much, much broader than I understood it to be, and who gave me guidance on how to access these other parts of law that I didn't know existed, changed the course of my career. You know, by the accident of sitting with her, I understood that Bay Street was an option. I understood that if I did relatively well, I could apply. I understood what was required in my application. And I understood what I had to do to get in front of the Bay Street firms and how to interview well so that folks felt comfortable with me and could see themselves working with me long hours. All that were all accidents. So think of the student that is. I was born to African immigrants. My dad never left Ghana. He died in a village. My mom works at a retirement home in Canada and didn't graduate from high school. My path to Bay Street was improbable and all a function of accident, good fortune and accidents, but those tell you that the ability to get into our profession when you are starting from that basis are all a function of the social determinants of justice. It's all the social determinants of education. The fact that I wasn't streamed into applied classes. The fact that I was not streamed, I was not labeled as a problematic child. Those were all accidents. I was more likely to fall into those. The fact that I met the right people at the right time to give me guidance, that's all a function of accidents. And what we need to do as a profession is ask ourselves, how can we let success, regardless of background, be a function of, not a function of accidents, but a function of ability and application. The second way we want to look at the social determinants of getting into justice is the idea that not everybody can afford to go to law school. I'll use my own story as an example. I went to law school later in life. And at that time, I was helping pay my mom's mortgage. So I got into law school and I got the letter that says, you got into law school, and I ran upstairs to say, hey, I got into law school, and my mom hugged me and smiled and said, congratulations. And as soon as she let go of me, her face changed because she realized that without me, she couldn't afford to pay her mortgage. Without me being in the house to contribute, there was a problem for our family unit. I didn't know how I was going to pay for law school. I didn't qualify for loans because I didn't have the credit history. I didn't have the money saved. So the idea of access to funds and the ability to fund a legal education becomes a function of your socioeconomic background. And again, if we're going to find ways to increase the diversity of the people that practice in this profession and to be a more inclusive profession, we have to make access to law school not a function of your socioeconomic background, but rather how do we give access and opportunities into these schools so that when the folks that are showing up there are as reflective as the broad diversity that exists in the Canadian community. I can go on and on and on, but I think those are hopefully good examples of the issues that determine justice and those of us that play a role in it. We're all a function of, this is a family business, and my daughter is going to have a way easier time getting into law school if she chooses to than I ever did. She's going to have way more guidance. I'm a lawyer. My wife is a lawyer. Her grandparents are lawyers. She's going to have access and privilege in a way that a lot of other kids in her, similar to her, won't have. And it's not only a function of race. It's not only a function of culture. It's a function of all the other pieces that we're talking about. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Raphael. And I do have a follow-up question, and I'd be really happy to open the follow-up question to any of our panelists who want to weigh in. But you've brought up some really excellent points, and I'd love to hear from you what you think law societies and local societies, broader law societies can do to revision what we're doing now for the benefit of these racialized students coming in to the profession.
I would, one easy thing is we do a good character assessment. We do that sometimes requires you to tell a story that's not always a straightforward story for some people. Right? That is something that we can think of. How do we assess the good character of candidates given who they were and their background, not always some objective standard of what we think a good character looks like. That's an example. The other piece is working with law schools and working with the profession at large to say, what are the barriers that allow access into the profession? And are those barriers something that we can alleviate? I'll give you an example of a conversation that I had with my former employer. So I used to be a senior counsel at TD. And during the George Floyd incident, my general counsel came to me and said, I want to do something. What can I do? And the first thing I said was, one, well, you're a bank, you can write a check. But more importantly, the interesting part is, how do you give people that don't have access to financial education and financial information to get access to that information and understand how they can build their own finances so they can access law school if they need to? And not only that, there's a lot of US studies that show that there's a massive wealth gap between Black lawyers and non-Black lawyers. And the function of that being, we start off with nothing, we dig ourselves into a much more massive hole. And then when we come out of law school, because we tend to be the only people that are probably in our families that are lawyers, we're supporting people as we're also navigating, building a practice probably, or paying our debt. And we make mistakes with our own finances, and it takes us much longer to understand the things that we need to do to be financially secure so we can help our own communities and our own families. These are all things. This is a conversation that I had with somebody that asked me a similar question to say, what are you uniquely placed to do? Look at the resources you have as a bank, and let's do that. And that's what TD ended up doing. And I will always be grateful for that, because they looked at themselves and said, as a bank, what can we do that is just beyond just writing a check? And I think the law societies can do the same.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I also think that a basic thing that law societies could start doing tomorrow is collecting data. A real, obstacle when diversity organizations are trying to make, argumentative points, or even just, assumptions about how lawyers are treated in the profession, or how is that we don't know the data of how many lawyers are actually in the profession because that data is often not accessible. So collection of data would be like a big thing. Now, we encourage obviously all of the firms to do the same, but they've all indicated that it's a voluntary process, and you know, it's something that they're not comfortable doing. But it really is a hindrance to trying to put forward, you know, arguments.
I will add one comment. I think that we could learn more from each other as we get more involved and understand each other's work more. You know, for example, I've met with the treasurer of the Law Society, Teresa, and she gave me a much better understanding of what the Law Society of Ontario is doing, its concerns, its work. Then I'm able to share that within FACL, and likewise, I invited Teresa and some others from Law Society of Ontario to attend the FACL board meeting. And she could share directly with our members, and also, you know, we could collaborate on certain things of common interest. And there may be others or organizations that, you know, we can also do the same thing with. I'm happy to learn what concerns folks in other places in Ontario. I think a lot of the diversity organizations are based in Toronto, but we have, you know, diverse lawyers across Ontario. As I mentioned, Justice Leonard Kim is in Sudbury, so you know they're out there, and I think like if anyone here wanted to attend a FACL board meeting, I'd be happy to have them attend and share ideas and concerns. So that's something else that we could do.
I would also like to invite those in attendance to connect with the associations that are on this panel today as a resource. You know, we've done EDI work in our own organizations. Many of us are more than happy to chat with you. We have volunteers that work with us. And if any of you want us to, you know, would like us to come and speak to your board or your association, I'm sure the members of the associations presenting today would be more than happy to.
Thank you, everyone. And so my next question I'd like to direct to Peter. Could you comment on some benefits and best practices of inter-association cooperation?
Sure. And I'm going to say recently I've been at a number of meetings with some of my co-speakers on this panel because we share sort of similar challenges, opportunities. And so there's a real strength in numbers, and also there's the opportunity to learn from each other. So and it can go to simple things like programming, you know, whether you know, maybe Cable's doing a good mentoring session in a particular way using Zoom, and you know, we can learn from them, or it could be for example, our website update. We're trying to do that at FACL, and you know, we've been able to. I've reached out to some of the other groups in terms of what they've done and who they've used, and so because I think that, you know, if my website looks similar to theirs, I don't think they'll mind so much. You know, we want to have similar information available, legal education about membership and awards. That kind of thing, so we can share that way as well. There's also chances to collaborate on things that I mentioned, interventions. There's been a number of instances where groups have worked together on an intervention represented by the same council, and so I think that's efficient from a use of legal and judicial resources. So joining that way. So those are just a few examples. of where we can collaborate and gain some efficiencies.
I'd like to, if it's okay, I'd like to amplify what Peter is saying, because there's a wind blowing in our profession that is contrary to what we're talking about here, which is how do we make our profession more inclusive and diverse. And I think we collaborate, the more we collaborate, the more we amplify each other's voices around issue of equity, diversity, and inclusion, the more that those values come to represent our profession. There's conversations that's happening around the Law Society and things like that, and issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion, that I think as associations, if we are aligned on the value of being more inclusive and more diverse, then amplifying each other's voices is important. Collaborating on responding to those kinds of issues, it's important. I've been happy to collaborate with Fakal and Saba on responding to or speaking on issues of judicial diversity, the diversity on the bench, issues of, racial slurs in schools and things like that. To me, advocating for a more diverse profession, especially at the leadership ranks, are great areas to collaborate and to amplify each other. Sometimes it feels like you're yelling into a void by yourself. It always feels better if you know there's others beside you when you're screaming.
I would add also that if the law associations here today are serious about inclusion in the profession, then you can't remain silent in the face of racism or sexism. You need to be that voice for change, and you need to be an ally. And, my own association, I'll say during the last venture election, was silent in the face of the campaign by that Slade, I can't remember the name, but, and I regret that. I regret, trying to maintain neutrality because no one really thought that would, that kind of, position taken by that group would succeed, and it did. And I will not make that same mistake twice.
We had been planning on waiting to ask questions from participants until the end, but we did get a question from an audience member that I think would be really well placed here, and I'd love to put it to you, because I think Raphael and Jennifer, some of your last comments just really touched on this. There was a question that what can associations do to become more welcoming and more inclusive? And I think perhaps the actions that you're discussing right now really go to whether an organization is being perceived as welcoming and inclusive. And so would there be any additional talking points that you'd like to bring up there? Yeah, Raphael?
My view is we all know what to say, right? It's interesting last year just watching and seeing all these different organizations, finance, law, coming out and speaking against anti-Black racism. It was gratifying, but it was also kind of sad to me. Right? It's not really about what you say, it's what you do. And we don't need something bad to happen to then say, let's do something. Martin Luther King has a quote attributed to Martin Luther King that says, it's not where you stand in the moment of convenience, but rather in the moment of challenge. We're in a moment of challenge. The conversation going on at the Law Society isn't simple. If it realized to its full potential, the things that we purport to care about with regard to equity, diversity, inclusion can disappear. We need to act. We all need to act. Our associations need to act. We need to be unified in our, if we are unified, then we should be unified in our voice to promote these values, because we can't take for granted, to Jen's first point, we can't take for granted that this won't succeed, and that our profession is as equal and as inclusive as it can be. It isn't. I hear horror stories every day about the challenges that Black lawyers face. I get emails that are heartbreaking. Our profession isn't as good as it can be, and we're not as inclusive there, so that we can take off and relax and this is, I don't think this is Ontario only. I think it's showing up in BC. I can see it elsewhere. So my answer in a long-winded way is, don't talk the talk, walk the walk. If you can put money behind inclusive initiative, do that. If yours is one of just volunteering your time, give that. If yours is one of volunteering your voice, raise your voice. This is not a time to be silent.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak on this topic before we move on? Jennifer?
I just want to say that, striving for inclusion is not difficult. It may seem difficult, it may be shrouded with complexity, but at its heart, it's really about ensuring everyone has a seat and a voice at the table, and that people are treated fairly, respectfully, and that we honor each other in this profession. And if we can do that, this is a profession I will be very proud of. And in terms of the how-tos, it's really just about thinking that way about everything you do as an association. It's about the programming that you roll out. For instance, if you do a programming that's centered on alcohol, who are you excluding? If you are doing a golf tournament, who are you excluding? Who are you including? How can you create programming that includes all of the members of your association, and also thinking about things like accessibility? Who can attend these events? What accessibility needs do they have? And not necessarily expecting people to ask for accommodations, but creating that space right at the outset. If you need live captioning for a big event, or if, maybe that should be a standard thing, live captioning, it shouldn't be that difficult. And so, and then when you look at your committees, are your committees diverse? Do you have a culture where people can disagree with you, can speak out? These are the things that you want to create within your own associations to achieve inclusion.
Thanks, Jennifer. And so, Devin, I'd like to ask you a question, if that's all right. How would you encourage racialized folks or Indigenous or folks from sexual or gender minority as candidates to run for bencher roles or other leadership roles within our community?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I did want to kind of touch on that last question too, but I thought I would save it just for when I was answering this one. A lot of what I talked about previously was that we needed, better data. But what I didn't mention was that the Law Society has put out 3 very good reports about what it's like to be a racialized person in this profession, a woman in this profession, and a student who is a racialized individual in this profession. So those reports are called, Options for Lawyer Licensing, a Consultation Paper, Working Together for Change, Strategies to Address Issues of Systemic Racism in the Legal Profession. And then the Law Society, and I think that this is the report that kind of started the ball rolling on change back in 2014, was called Challenges Facing Racialized Licensees. And that was developed by Stratcom. The Law Society outsourced that to a firm that could provide a very robust methodology of, surveying and gathering information and data from a bunch of respondents within the legal community. I think over 3,500 respondents actually completed the survey, and their findings were stark. I'm actually going to put that report in the chat here, because a lot of what was previously asked in the question was, what kinds of things can law associations be doing to promote, diversity within the workplace and within the profession. And this report lists 24 recommendations, like concrete examples of what your associations and the Law Society can implement, almost right away. A lot of them involve, empowerment through mentorship, having baked in criteria for hiring, that sort of thing. But I'll let everyone, peruse the report on their own time. What I'd just like to bring up, a few sections of the report that I mentioned were stark to me, where it says that racialized licensees were twice as likely than non-racialized counterparts to report less rapid career advancement than their colleagues. Racialized licensees reported lower success rates across a range of key measures, including articling placements, finding a suitable first job, and finding employment in a suitable practice environment. They were twice as likely as non-racialized surveys or persons to have completed the surveys to report having felt disadvantaged in law school. And they were twice as likely to report on a list of 17 factors of potential barriers to practicing law in the province of Ontario. And it goes on and on from there. Now, in terms of encouraging persons to run for bencher elections and be part of, this process of, regulating our profession, as we have done, for hundreds of years, I think a lot of people were kind of turned off by the rhetoric in the last bencher election, where it kind of became this kind of stop SOP. And for those of you who don't know, SOP kind of stemmed from this report that I just, pasted in the chat, because one of the recommendations was to implement, some sort of way for the Law Society to say, to allow their members to say that, they were in support of diverse and inclusive, events or mandates within the profession. And I think that kind of like took the spotlight, and because that was just one of like maybe 15 recommendations. And that kind of took the spotlight away from all of the other good concrete recommendations that were actually in the report. And because it focused on, oh, well, is this compelled speech or is it not? I don't want to be forced to say something that, it's not the fact that I agree or disagree with the content of what's being said. It's just I don't like being forced to say something else, or to say something that when I should have the option to not. It's a freedom of speech issue, right? And that kind of took away the brunt of the other recommendations and took the spotlight off of it. And then that became a real live issue within the bencher election. But I would say that I think for the most part, people are in support of diverse and inclusive programming. It's about getting people re-engaged in, and I think reading the data and the reports that are out there about how the profession can change and how it is already changing will help people understand that, it's not really as big of an issue as we think it is, in the sense that there are people who are, as we know, advocates for diversity and inclusion, and also advocates within their own local bar associations who are pushing these initiatives already. And we, as a whole, as a profession, should encourage these people to step up and run for bencher roles, and also encourage people within our associations to vote, because I think the voter turnout was the most egregious part of the last election. It's that people were apathetic. I think part of that has to do with the voting process. It is quite convoluted and complicated. I think if all of the associations that are part of FOLA, put their heads together to come up with like a very clear voting guidelines. I think that would help. And I think as well as like talking to people about, especially your current benchers, about issues that are really live for you in your profession, and that will help, take some of the glare off of this Stop SOP, which in my mind was an issue that was made to be more than it really was, because it was not an essential part of the diversity and inclusion recommendations that came out of the report.
Thanks, Devin. And so I'd like to pose this question to all of our panelists. How important to your organization is engagement with and support from the benchers? And, if it is important, what are some initiatives that benchers could adopt to assist your mandates?
I'll answer that. I think, I think I at least speak for the Women's Law Association of Ontario and probably other associations, but I think that a relationship is important, and that that benchers from the Law Society are interested in the needs of our members and have that concern. And it's not just a matter of listening to what our concerns is, but it's also taking steps to educate themselves. And so, I think, at a minimum, benchers should have some education about Indigenous history, and perhaps lawyers and licensees should have that as a requirement of practice. I don't see how we can serve the public, which includes Indigenous people, without having some knowledge, some basic knowledge about history of indigeneity in Canada. And, I took a program that was online, very simple to do, called Indigenous Canada. It's received quite a bit of attention. It's come out of the University of Alberta. And I found that extremely helpful in understanding, why do we say the land acknowledgement? Why, what is reconciliation really, what's it about, and how can we further that? And how can the legal profession and the judiciary be a part of that reconciliation? And so that's what I'm looking for from the leadership at the Law Society, from Convocation, that they have an understanding of these issues so that they can engage with the various law associations and members of the public.
I'd like to chime in on the importance of engagement and support from the benchers and the various law societies. I think it's tremendously important. It's easy to feel like an outsider. Growing up, I think I was more naive about, just the perceptions of race and racism in Canada. I didn't really see myself as someone who was so different. Unfortunately, it's sort of growing on me, not always the best way. And things like the results of the last bencher election were disheartening, sort of shocking, and kind of a bit of a wake-up call that not everyone in Canada, I know it's not all of Canada, but certainly not everyone is like-minded in terms of their views on race and equality. So to have the benchers and the leadership reach out and to give support to organizations like FACL and the others, it to me is very meaningful. It sort of recasts the balance and sort of tells me and our organizations that there are a good group of people who understand and value and appreciate the challenges and they appreciate the organizations that we work with and what we're doing. And so when I've been approached by the ventures and leadership of the Law Society, it's been really encouraging and energizing to have that. So, I would encourage people here to think about how to reach out to diverse lawyers or organizations in your own communities. Because I think it can empower folks. It can make people feel more included, that they're part of something and not looking at things from the outside. So anyway, that's how I feel about that.
Thanks. And either Raphael or Jennifer want to comment, and if not, I'm certainly happy to open it up to questions from the audience. If there are any, you could feel free to put them in the chat.
There's certainly nothing more for me to add. I think Devin and Peter covered it very well.
If I might, I guess I'd just like to make a couple of comments. One of the difficulties in doing this virtually is I don't think you can appreciate perhaps the reactions that I think are happening out here. I think there would have been some strong applause at certain points during your presentation. I think we're all grateful. Raphael, when you were speaking, and Jennifer, what came to mind was together we're stronger. And I hope, I appreciate that my reign is quickly coming to an end, but I will